Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Please drop a like or comment if you want to help the channel. Now let's get into the true scary stories. Watch me. It was late, far later than I should have been awake, when I first stumbled upon the VHS tape. I had been digging through my grandparents' old attic, the air thick with the smell of mildew and decaying cardboard. The boxes were filled with the usual forgotten relics, dusty photo albums, cracked vinyl records, and yellowed newspapers. I didn't expect to find anything of real interest, but then I saw it, an unmarked, black VHS tape, covered in a layer of grime. My heart thumped harder than it should have as I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. There, on the side, scrawled in faded red ink, was a message that made my blood run cold: "Watch me." I stared at the tape for what felt like minutes, my fingers tingling with unease. Why would someone label it that? More importantly, why had I never seen this before? My grandparents had long since passed, and I thought I knew everything about their house, but this felt different. An odd sense of dread bubbled up inside me, but curiosity won out. I wiped off the dust and decided to take it downstairs, where the old VCR still sat connected to a boxy TV in the living room. The house was silent, the kind of silence that presses in on you from all sides. I felt like I was being watched even then, though I shrugged it off. It was just nerves, I told myself, trying to quiet the nagging voice in the back of my mind. The tape slid into the VCR with a satisfying click, and after a brief flicker of static, the screen came to life. At first, the footage was nothing but grainy black and white fuzz, but soon, a figure came into focus. It was a window, my window. My breath hitched in my throat as I recognized the frame and the faded curtains. Someone was filming the outside of my house, just standing there. I leaned closer to the screen, my pulse racing. The camera jostled slightly, and then there was a pause. Slowly, the lens zoomed in, pushing closer to the window. My window. I could see my own shadow moving through the room in the footage, completely unaware. My heart pounded in my chest as the realization sank in. Someone had been standing outside my house, filming me. I wanted to stop the tape, but something made me keep watching. A dark shape moved past the camera, just for a second, like a shadow with no owner. I jolted up from the couch and rushed to the window, throwing the curtains open. Nothing. The yard was empty, just like it had been for years. But as I stood there, my breath fogging up the glass, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next morning, I found something else. A fresh handprint on the outside of my window, smeared across the glass. The handprint haunted me. I scrubbed it off the window first thing in the morning, but no amount of cleaning erased the eerie feeling that had settled over me. I couldn't shake the image from the VHS tape, the way the camera had zoomed in on my window, as if the person behind it knew I would eventually find this recording. Who had been outside? Why were they filming me? And more terrifyingly, were they still watching? I spent the day convincing myself it was a prank. Maybe an old joke my grandfather played on someone decades ago. It seemed like the only explanation that made sense, though it did little to comfort me. The unease lingered, gnawing at the back of my mind, until I decided to watch the rest of the tape. Maybe there was something I had missed, some clue, some detail that would reveal the truth. That night, with every light in the house turned on, I pressed play again. The same grainy footage filled the screen, the outside of my house, my window, the faint shadow of my past self inside. But then the tape continued. The camera panned slowly, turning away from the house and focusing on the street. For a while, there was nothing, just the dim glow of streetlights and the occasional car passing in the distance. And then, it happened. The figure appeared. A tall, thin silhouette, barely visible at first but growing more distinct as it moved closer to the camera. My stomach churned as I watched it step into the light, revealing its unnaturally elongated limbs, its head tilted at a disturbing angle. It wasn't human. No way. Its movements were jerky, almost mechanical, as it approached the house, my house. The camera zoomed in again, capturing every twitch, every unnatural twist of its body as it crossed the yard and stood in front of my window. I froze. This wasn't a prank. This was something else, something far worse. The figure stayed there, unmoving, staring directly into the camera, and then slowly, so slowly, it lifted its hand. The long, thin fingers pressed against the glass, exactly where I had found the handprint. My pulse raced as I stared at the screen. The figure wasn't just watching me. It had been inside my yard. My throat went dry, and for the first time, I realized something terrifying. I had no memory of anyone standing outside my house that night. I didn't even remember when the tape could have been filmed. That window had been untouched for years, but the footage. It showed a time when I had been there, inside, completely unaware. I turned off the TV, my hands trembling. The silence in the room felt oppressive, like the air had thickened, trapping me inside. That night, I barely slept, every creak of the house making me jump. I swore I wouldn't watch the tape again. But by the next evening, my curiosity was too strong. I needed answers. I played the tape one more time, fast-forwarding through the footage of the figure. The tape should have ended there, but it didn't. Instead, the screen flickered, and the camera cut to a new scene, this time, inside my house. The camera was pointed at my bedroom door, slightly ajar, with only darkness beyond it. A loud knock echoed through my empty living room, pulling me out of my stupor. The knock rattled through the house again, louder this time. My body tensed. I was still sitting in front of the TV, the black screen casting faint reflections in the dimly lit room. The sound was deliberate, 3 sharp raps, as though someone wanted to make absolutely sure I heard it. My pulse quickened as I forced myself to stand, each step toward the front door feeling heavier than the last. My mind raced. Who could it be at this hour? I checked the window, hoping for some clue. The street was empty. No cars, no people, just the faint glow of the streetlights casting long shadows over the empty road. There was no sign of the strange figure from the tape, but that didn't ease my anxiety. I approached the door cautiously, the weight of my breath heavy in the silence. Who is it? My voice came out hoarse, barely louder than a whisper. No answer. Only silence. Another knock. This one slower, more deliberate. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the lock. As I pulled open the door, a cold gust of air rushed in. No one was there. The porch was empty, just like the street. My eyes darted back and forth, scanning the shadows for any movement, any sign that someone, or something, had been waiting. Then, I noticed it. Lying on the doorstep, like a twisted gift, was another VHS tape. It was smaller than the first, and on the spine, written in the same red ink, were the words, "Play me." My heart sank. I felt the weight of the darkness pressing in, every instinct screaming at me to leave it there, to close the door and never look at it again. But I didn't. Against my better judgment, I picked it up, the tape cold and damp in my hands. Back inside, I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing through the empty house. I stood in the dim living room, clutching the tape. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and doubt, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed to know what was on it. I slid it into the VCR, my hands shaking, and pressed play. The screen flickered to life once more, but this time, there was no static, no slow build-up of creepy footage. It was immediate. The camera was pointed at my front door, this very door, filmed from outside. My stomach turned as I watched the footage of myself pulling the door open just moments ago. I saw myself standing there, the confused look on my face as I scanned the street, and then the moment I bent down to pick up the tape. I stared at the screen, horrified, as I watched myself close the door and disappear from view. The camera didn't cut off. Instead, it slowly panned up, zooming in on the second-story window of my house, my bedroom window. And there, standing inside, was a shadow. The figure from the previous tape was in my bedroom. I could barely breathe, the air thick with dread as I scrambled upstairs, my legs feeling like lead as I burst into my room. I flicked on the light. Nothing. The room was empty, the bed unmade just as I had left it. But the air was different, heavy, as though someone had just been there. My eyes darted to the window, the glass fogged with condensation. A new handprint. Fresh and smeared across the glass. Then, without warning, the TV downstairs cut to static, and a voice, low and whispering, filled the room, "I'm coming inside." The voice echoed in my head, soft, whispering, but with a clarity that sent a jolt of terror straight down my spine. "I'm coming inside." I stood frozen in my bedroom, my eyes fixed on the fogged window and the fresh handprint smeared across the glass. There was no way this could be real. No way that something could have been in my house without me knowing. But the voice. That voice was undeniably real. I had to move. I had to get out. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt heavy, like I was rooted to the spot. A creak came from the hallway outside my room, faint but unmistakable. Someone, or something, was out there. I swallowed hard, my heart hammering against my ribs as I crept toward the door. With each step, the air seemed to grow colder, thick with the presence of something unseen but impossibly close. I reached for the doorknob, fingers trembling as I pulled the door open, just a crack. The hallway was dark, the light from my room barely spilling out into the corridor. I squinted, trying to see anything that might be lurking there, but the shadows were thick, pulling at the far end of the hall. Another creak, this one closer, sent a fresh wave of panic through me. My breath hitched as I listened to the slow, deliberate footsteps moving toward me. "Who's there?" I croaked, my voice barely more than a whisper. No answer. Just silence, and then the soft shuffle of feet again. I had to do something. Ripping the baseball bat I kept under my bed, I stepped into the hallway, bat raised, my pulse roaring in my ears. I inched forward, my back pressed against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. The sound stopped. I turned the corner, bat swinging out in front of me, but the hall was empty. No intruder. No monster. Nothing but the faint sound of static coming from downstairs. I lowered the bat slightly, my mind racing. Maybe I was losing it, maybe the tapes had gotten to me, twisted my perception of what was real. But then the static grew louder, more insistent, until it was like a swarm of angry insects filling my ears. And then, from the living room below, I heard it again, my own voice, as if it had been recorded. "Who's there?" I froze, the blood draining from my face. The voice was unmistakably mine, but it wasn't coming from me. It was coming from the TV. My heart slammed against my chest as I bolted down the stairs, each step feeling like a sprint through quicksand. When I reached the living room, I could barely comprehend what I was seeing. The TV showed footage of the very moment I had just lived. It was me, standing at the top of the stairs, baseball bat in hand, staring into the darkness of the hallway. But in the footage, I wasn't alone. Behind me, barely visible in the shadows, stood the figure, tall, twisted, and wrong. My stomach lurched. I spun around, bat raised, but the space behind me was empty. The figure from the tape wasn't there, but I could feel it. The air was thick with its presence, the shadows impossibly deep, as if they were waiting for me to slip into them. The static from the TV cut out, replaced by that whispering voice once again. "I'm inside," it hissed. And then, the last thing I saw before the screen went black, a pair of eyes. Not human, not even close. Watching me from the shadows. The lights flickered, once, twice, and then went out entirely, plunging the house into darkness. In the oppressive silence that followed, I could hear only one thing, the slow, deliberate sound of breathing coming from right behind me. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Unwanted Guest. I first noticed them on a cold Tuesday night. The kind of night where the wind howled through the cracks in the window and the darkness seemed to seep into the walls, creeping its way through the entire house. It had been a long day at work, and all I wanted was a few hours of peaceful sleep. But peace was the last thing I would get. As I stepped into my bedroom, there they were, wet footprints, clearly visible against the worn wooden floorboards, leading from the bathroom door to the edge of my bed. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I had spilled some water, or perhaps there was a leak in the bathroom. But as I stood there, staring at the footprints, the air grew thick with an eerie stillness. Each print was unmistakably human, the faint shape of toes and heels imprinted in dampness, shining faintly in the dim light of my bedside lamp. A chill ran down my spine. I lived alone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. The kind that feels like it's alive, pressing in from all sides. I walked cautiously to the bathroom, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was a leak. Maybe there had to be an explanation. But when I opened the bathroom door, the tub was dry. bone dry. Not a drop of water had touched it, and yet, the wet footprints had clearly come from this room. I crouched down, running my fingers over the damp prints. They were cold, colder than the rest of the room, as if they had just been made by something fresh, something still dripping. My heart pounded in my chest. I stood up quickly, scanning the room, but there was no one there. Just me and the thickening silence. My pulse hammered in my ears as I walked back to my bedroom, my thoughts racing. Maybe I was tired, stressed. Maybe I was imagining things. But as I climbed into bed, pulling the covers over me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The house felt wrong, like it was watching me, waiting for something. I lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows, made my skin crawl. Just as my eyelids started to grow heavy, I heard it. The soft, unmistakable sound of water dripping. Drip. 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 It was coming from the bathroom again. I froze, my heart racing. I hadn't turned the tap on, and I hadn't touched the tub. So why did it sound like someone, or something, had? I didn't want to move, but the dripping was relentless. Each droplet echoed in the stillness of the house, pulling me from the edge of sleep into a state of suffocating awareness. My mouth was dry as I slowly pushed back the covers. The air was thick and heavy, the kind that clings to your skin like a second layer. As I stood, the room seemed to grow colder, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I took slow, cautious steps toward the bathroom, feeling my heart pound harder with each one. The bathroom door was ajar, a sliver of blackness staring back at me. My fingers grazed the knob, slick with cold moisture, and I hesitated before pushing it open. The sound of dripping water grew louder, and when I finally stepped inside, my breath caught in my throat. The tub was no longer dry. It was filled to the brim with dark, murky water. A thick, earthy smell filled the room, like the scent of wet soil mixed with something old, something decayed. My stomach turned, but I couldn't look away. The water was unnaturally still, as if it had been untouched for centuries, yet droplets of water trickled down the sides and onto the floor. And then, the footprints, wet, fresh, and leading once more from the tub to my bed. I stared at the tub in disbelief. There was no reason for it to be filled, and certainly not with this stagnant, filthy water. I hadn't taken a bath in months, years, even, and I never ran the water like this. The soft drip, drip of water echoed behind me as I backed away, my throat tight with fear. That's when I saw it. Movement, just beneath the surface. A ripple, faint but unmistakable, disturbing the stillness of the water. Something was there. I didn't stay to find out what it was. I turned and bolted, slamming the bathroom door behind me, my heart racing. But as I stumbled back into my bedroom, I froze. The footprints, they had changed. There were more of them now, and they no longer led from the bathroom to my bed. Instead, they circled my bed, over and over again, as if something, or someone, had been pacing, watching, waiting. My legs buckled, and I collapsed onto the floor, trembling. What was happening? This wasn't a nightmare. I could feel the icy dampness on my skin, smell the stench of that murky water. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, desperate to call someone, anyone. My fingers fumbled as I unlocked the screen, but before I could dial, the temperature in the room plummeted. A cold draft swept through the room, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of something rotten. I heard it then, a low, guttural whisper, so close I could feel the breath on my neck. "Get out," it hissed. I turned, but there was no one there. Just me, the empty room, and the wet footprints that now led straight to the foot of my bed. I barely slept that night, my body trembling under the blankets as the feeling of being watched clawed at my mind. The room was suffocating, filled with a silence so thick it seemed to press against my ears. The footprints had dried, but their ghostly presence lingered in the dim morning light, seared into my memory. I tried to make sense of it all, but there was no logic in what was happening. By the time the first rays of sunlight pierced through my curtains, I had convinced myself it was over. Whatever it was. But the relief was short-lived. Later that evening, as the day slipped into twilight, I found myself back at the bathroom door. I told myself I was being stupid, that I should just forget about it, but something compelled me to check. The door creaked open under my touch, revealing the tub, empty again, as if nothing had ever been there. I laughed nervously, relief washing over me. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe I had imagined the entire thing. I turned to leave, but my foot caught on something cold and slick. Another wet footprint, fresh, right by the door. I hadn't stepped in any water. My skin prickled, and I couldn't stop myself from looking back at the tub. This time, my blood ran cold. There, in the far corner of the bathroom, the air shimmered unnaturally, a ripple of movement I couldn't explain. A shape slowly materialized, barely visible at first, like a figure emerging from water. And then I saw her. A woman, or at least what was left of her. Her skin was waterlogged, pale and bloated, her eyes dark pits of emptiness. Her hair clung to her face, soaked and stringy, dripping onto the floor as she stood motionless, half submerged in shadow. My breath hitched in my throat, my body frozen in place. She didn't move, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. "I didn't mean to disturb you," I managed to choke out, my voice shaking, barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" Her lips parted slowly, but no words came out. Instead, water began to seep from her mouth, pouring down her chin in rivulets. The bathroom floor was slick with it, the smell of rot and decay filling my nose. I stumbled backward, my foot slipping on the wet floor, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. She was stepping forward now, leaving wet footprints behind her, just like before. Each step brought her closer to me, the air around her heavy with something ancient, something angry. My chest tightened as she raised a hand, skeletal fingers dripping with water. Her nails were black and cracked, and she pointed at me, her mouth opening wider. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice a wet gurgle, like something that had been drowned long ago. "Come with me." I bolted from the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded in my ears, and my body shook uncontrollably. I leaned against the door, waiting, listening for the sound of her footsteps, waiting for her to break through. But there was nothing. Silence. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then I heard the faintest sound, water trickling, soft at first, then louder. I backed away from the door, terror gripping me. The water wasn't coming from the bathroom anymore. It was coming from under the door, seeping into my bedroom, flowing toward the bed. My bed. I stood frozen in place as the wet footprints appeared once more, moving across the floor, heading straight for me. This time, they didn't stop at the bed. They kept coming. I stumbled backward, my legs refusing to carry me fast enough. The wet footprints continued their slow, relentless approach, each step sounding like a heartbeat, pounding louder and louder in my ears. Water began pooling around my feet, icy and thick, soaking into the carpet. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. All I could do was watch as the air grew colder, the shadow of something unseen crawling ever closer. The door to the bathroom creaked open, despite the fact I had slammed it shut just moments before. The woman's figure emerged again, her body dripping, leaving a trail of water in her wake. But this time, she wasn't alone. Dark, misshapen figures slithered behind her, their forms barely distinguishable from the shadows, faceless and grotesque. Their movements were unnatural, like something dredged up from the depths of a forgotten sea. My mind raced for a way out, but the room felt like it was shrinking, the walls pressing in, and the temperature plunging even lower. The smell of rotting water choked me as the first figure reached me, her cold hand closing around my wrist with a grip that felt like iron. Her touch was unbearable, an icy pressure that went straight to my bones, sapping the warmth from my body. "Let me go," I gasped, struggling to free myself. But her grip tightened, her hollow eyes boring into mine. Water poured from her mouth again, as if she was trying to speak but could only drown in her own words. Then she pulled, dragging me toward the bathroom, toward the waterlogged abyss that waited behind her. The other shadowy figures followed, their movements jerky and wrong, as if they were barely tethered to this world. I fought with every ounce of strength I had, but it was no use. My feet slid across the slick floor as she pulled me closer, the water rising up to my ankles, then to my knees. Panic clawed at my chest as the cold reached into my lungs, and I couldn't breathe. I realized then, this wasn't about the house, or the footprints. She wanted me, wanted to take me back with her. The bathroom door loomed ahead, and beyond it, The tub, now full again with that same dark, murky water. It rippled unnaturally, as if something far below the surface was waiting. My reflection in the water was distorted, a shadow of myself being swallowed whole. The figures whispered, their voices a low, echoing hum, but their words were garbled, lost beneath the suffocating sound of rushing water. I was going under. In a final, desperate attempt, I twisted my body, kicking out at her. My foot struck something solid, and for a moment, her grip faltered. I broke free, stumbling backward, gasping for breath as the water rose to my chest. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I threw open the door to my bedroom, barely making it to the hallway, my body drenched and trembling. But when I turned around, the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire house. Silence filled the air. The water was gone. The footprints were gone. But I knew, deep down, it wasn't over. It had never been over. Because when I glanced back at the end of the hallway, the bathroom door slowly creaked open again. And this time, the footprints didn't stop at my bed. They were coming toward me, quicker now, as if whoever, or whatever, was behind them was done waiting. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 3. The Backward Clock. It started with the clock. A relic of another time, its brass face tarnished and its hands moving with the slow, deliberate precision of something ancient. I'd bought it at a small, cluttered antique shop on the outskirts of town. The owner had been all too eager to part with it, his thin smile never quite reaching his eyes. I had felt drawn to it, compelled, even. Now, as it hung on my bedroom wall, I couldn't escape the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake. At first, it was just a faint ticking sound. Soft, almost soothing, like the heartbeat of a distant memory. But then, late one night as I lay in bed, the ticking grew louder, sharper. My eyes snapped open, and I swore I could feel it reverberating through my chest. I turned to look at the clock, expecting to see the hands moving forward in their slow, steady pace. But instead, they were moving backward, unfurling the hours as though time itself were unraveling before me. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and when I looked again, the hands were still. It was as if nothing had changed. I chalked it up to my exhaustion, my mind playing tricks in the dead of night. But the next morning, I noticed something strange. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked different, subtly so, but different nonetheless. My skin seemed tighter, my hair thicker, as if I had stepped back into an earlier version of myself. I shook the thought away. It was absurd. As the days passed, the clock's behavior grew more erratic. I started to avoid looking at it directly, the unease it stirred within me growing stronger each day. It felt alive, as though the ticking were more than just the mechanism inside, like it was watching, waiting for me to look away. And every time I did, I felt a cold, creeping sensation that time was slipping backward, dragging me with it. Then one night, as I lay in bed, the air in the room grew thick, suffocating. The ticking became unbearably loud, filling the space until it was all I could hear. My heart raced, sweat beating on my skin, and in the darkness, I felt something shift. I turned to the clock, and for the briefest moment, I saw a shadow, a figure, lurking behind the glass face. Its eyes glowed with a cold, unnatural light, and its lips curled into a smile that sent chills down my spine. I sat up in bed, gasping for air, the clock now silent. But the figure remained, its presence lingering in the corner of my vision. I knew, in that moment, that this was no ordinary clock. It was something far older, far darker than I could have ever imagined. And it was hungry? The morning after I saw the figure behind the glass, I couldn't shake the feeling of its presence. It followed me, like a shadow lurking just out of sight, always hovering in the back of my mind. I tried to go about my day, focusing on work, chores, anything to drown out the memory of those glowing eyes. But it was impossible. Everywhere I went, I heard that ticking, soft and rhythmic, like a second pulse in my ears. I had to know what was happening. That night, I found myself staring at the clock again, daring it to tick backward as it had before. I watched the hands move slowly, their familiar path somehow taunting me. But I was too afraid to blink, too afraid to look away. As the seconds stretched into minutes, my eyelids grew heavy. I could feel sleep pulling me under, but I fought it. Then, just as my vision began to blur, the ticking stopped. The silence was deafening. I sat up in bed, wide-eyed, waiting for the sound to resume. But instead, the room grew colder, the shadows on the walls deepening as though the darkness was gathering strength. My breath hitched in my throat, and then, I heard it, a voice. Faint at first, like the murmur of distant wind, but growing louder, clearer. "You're not alone," it whispered. I jumped from the bed, my heart pounding as the voice echoed through the room. It wasn't coming from the clock, but from somewhere else, everywhere at once. I frantically searched the corners of the room, but saw nothing. The air seemed to shimmer, warping as if reality itself was bending around me. And then, in the dim light cast by the street lamp outside, I saw it, etched into the glass face of the clock, a handprint. Not mine. A chill raced down my spine as I slowly backed away. The handprint faded as I stared, but its impression remained burned into my mind. I knew I needed help. But who would believe me? That a clock could do this, that it could bring something inhuman into my home? I thought of calling my best friend, Sarah. She always had a way of making sense of things. But when I picked up my phone, the screen blinked to life with an unread text message from her. "I think something's wrong with time," the message read. My fingers froze above the keyboard. I hadn't told her anything. We hadn't even spoken in days. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a photo. A picture of me, lying in bed, sleeping. But my hair was graying, the edges of my face drawn tight as though I'd aged a decade overnight. I dropped the phone, my body trembling as fear swallowed me whole. The clock, the voice, the figure, all of it was real. And somehow, it was reaching through time, pulling me into a nightmare I couldn't escape. I stood there in the silence, my mind racing. I had to do something. But what? The ticking had stopped, but I knew it was only a matter of time before it started again, before he returned. The figure in the clock wasn't just watching. He was waiting for something. And I was starting to fear what that something was. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every sound felt amplified, the creak of the floorboards, the groan of the wind outside, even my own heartbeat drumming in my ears. I sat in the corner of the room, knees pulled to my chest, eyes locked on the clock. It was silent now, but the memory of the ticking and the figure behind the glass haunted me. Every time I blinked, I expected to see him again, smiling that twisted, knowing smile. Morning came slowly, dragging the shadows from the room, but it brought no comfort. My body ached from exhaustion, and I knew I couldn't go on like this. I needed answers. Desperation clawed at my mind as I thought of the antique shop where I had bought the cursed thing. Maybe the shopkeeper knew more than he let on. Maybe this was some cruel game, a trick played on me for reasons I couldn't yet understand. I left the house, glancing back at the clock one last time before closing the door behind me. The streets felt too quiet as I made my way toward the outskirts of town. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. By the time I reached the shop, the sun had barely risen, casting long shadows across the cobblestone path. The shop's windows were dark, the inside looking even more decrepit than I remembered. My hand trembled as I pushed open the door, the bell above it ringing out in the silence. The musty scent of dust and old wood filled my nose, and for a moment, I wondered if the shop had been abandoned entirely. But then, from behind a curtain, the shopkeeper appeared, his eyes narrowing as soon as he saw me. "I knew you'd be back," he said, his voice low and raspy. "They always come back." My stomach churned. "What is this?" I asked, my voice breaking. "What's happening to me? To the clock?" He stepped forward, leaning on the counter with gnarled hands. His eyes, sunken and tired, seemed to hold centuries of knowledge. "You shouldn't have taken it," he muttered, shaking his head. "That clock, it doesn't just keep time. It holds it. Traps it. And it's bound to something far worse than time itself." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Who's inside the clock?" I whispered. The shopkeeper's expression darkened. "Not who," he said, his voice barely audible now. "What? There's a demon bound to that clock. A creature older than you can imagine. It feeds on time, distorts it. And now that it has you, well, it won't let go so easily." My heart raced, panic gripping me. How do I stop it? I asked, my voice rising in desperation. How do I get rid of it? He shook his head slowly, his eyes gleaming with a strange mixture of pity and fear. You don't, he said. The only way to stop it is to destroy the clock. But even then, you can't escape what's been started. I felt the weight of his words crash over me like a tidal wave. Destroy the clock? But what would happen to me if I did? Would I be freed, or would I simply be lost in time forever, like a pawn in the demon's twisted game? Before I could ask any more questions, the shopkeeper straightened, his face hardening. You've got little time left, he said. The demon's already begun to take you. Haven't you noticed? The aging? The way time warps around you? I felt a shiver run through my body. He was right. Every time the clock ticked backward, it felt like a part of me was being peeled away, as if I was unraveling from existence itself. I turned to leave, my mind spinning with dread. But as I reached the door, the shopkeeper called after me. One last thing, he said. When the clock stops again, and it will, don't look away. Whatever you do, don't look away. I left without responding, the door slamming shut behind me. My chest tightened with fear as his words echoed in my mind. Don't look away. But what would happen if I did? I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. I returned home just as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting the streets in an eerie orange glow. The house felt colder than before, as if something had seeped into its bones while I was away. I stood in the doorway for what felt like an eternity, too afraid to cross the threshold. The ticking had started again. I could hear it through the walls, steady and relentless. It pulled me in like a siren's call, daring me to face the thing that waited in the shadows. As I stepped inside, the air thickened, oppressive and heavy with the scent of damp earth. My eyes immediately fell on the clock, its brass face gleaming in the dim light. The hands moved backward in slow, deliberate circles, each tick sending a shiver through me. The figure behind the glass was back, its eyes glowing with that cold, unnatural light. This time, I didn't look away. I remembered the shopkeeper's warning, don't look away. But standing there, facing the demon's gaze, I felt an overwhelming urge to flee. It was as if something deep inside me screamed for survival, telling me to run, to hide. Yet, I couldn't move. The clock had me now, had my time. And I knew there was no escaping it. The ticking grew louder, a deafening chorus of seconds being stolen, moments erased. My body felt different, older. I could see it now, my hands wrinkling, my skin pulling tighter around my bones. I was aging in real time, the years slipping through my fingers like sand in an hourglass. And then, the ticking stopped. The silence was absolute. I held my breath, waiting, but nothing happened. I took a step forward, my heart hammering in my chest, and then it spoke. The voice from before, the one that had whispered in the dark, now boomed through the room, deep and echoing with a terrible, ancient power. Your time has come, it said, the words sending a tremor through my very soul. I stood frozen as the figure in the clock shifted, its hand reaching out toward the glass. Slowly, impossibly, it began to push through, the barrier between us bending like the surface of water. The figure's clawed fingers emerged first, long and bony, followed by its grotesque arm. I wanted to scream, but the air caught in my throat as I watched it pull itself into my reality, one piece at a time. It was hideous. Its body was twisted, its skin pale and leathery, stretched too tight over its gaunt frame. Its face, what passed for a face, was a grotesque mockery of humanity, with hollow eyes that burned like molten embers. It smiled, the corners of its mouth stretching unnaturally wide, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. I stumbled backward, my legs giving out beneath me as the demon fully emerged from the clock, towering over me. It moved with unnatural grace, each step deliberate, slow, as if savoring the moment. Its eyes locked on mine, and I could feel it drawing closer, not just physically, but in time. The years I had lost were now its to claim, and it would take me with them. Desperation surged through me, and I crawled toward the fireplace, where an iron poker rested. I grabbed it, my hand trembling as I swung it wildly at the clock. The demon laughed, a low, guttural sound that rattled my bones. But I didn't stop. I struck the clock again and again, glass shattering, gears flying. The clock screamed, an unearthly wail that shook the house, but I kept going. Finally, with one last swing, the clock collapsed, a heap of twisted metal and broken wood. The demon screeched in agony, its form flickering like a dying flame. It lunged at me, but I swung the poker again, and this time it passed through the creature's body as though it were made of smoke. For a brief moment, the world stood still. The demon hissed, its body warping and twisting as it was pulled back toward the broken remains of the clock. Its eyes met mine one last time, filled with rage and a promise of vengeance. Then, with a final, deafening crack, it was gone. I lay there on the floor, gasping for air, my body aching with age and exhaustion. The silence that followed was thick and oppressive, but the ticking was gone. The clock was destroyed. I had survived. But when I looked in the mirror, I knew the truth. My hair was white, my face lined with deep wrinkles. The years had been taken, and though the demon was gone, its mark would remain. Time, it seemed, had finally caught up with me. And in the corner of the room, where the clock had once stood, I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible ticking. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.